You have been forewarned.
He's at the top right.
Share my screen.
Okay, I think we're ready.
Let's do it. How many people did you count, Patrick?
We had 28,
I
now
wanna
we got
ask a
27. I think we've hit equilibrium.
All right.
I want to ask a question. He said to write it in the chat. Where is that?
Yeah. So the chat is, do you see it looks like a little comic bubble button at the top in the top bar?
Patrick, this is Carol Davis. Liz just messaged me and she says she's having trouble getting on.
No,
I
Liz
got
is on.
the other day.
No,
Is
I'm
she
on.
on now?
I'm on, Carol.
Oh.
Yeah, I just turned my phone off and turned it back on, and it just popped me right in.
Okay, so for the Lees, I'm going to share my screen. You're going to have to stare at yourselves. I'm sorry. Bye, boss.
Don't forget to hit record.
I did hit record. So is it Lee? I don't know
Yeah.
that fam. See this chat button where I'm pointing right here? Can you see my screen? You have to stare at yourself too. You see that little bubble? If you click on that, it will open up this sidebar and you can type in here. Can you see all that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to minimize this so you don't have to stare at yourselves. All right, and I will do a little quick thing on the teams as well. So, all right, I'm going to get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are very excited to share the Willoughby Lake Watershed Action Plan final report with you all tonight. My name is Bevan Barber Campbell, and I work for the Orleans County Conservation District. I've been co-leading this project, this LWAP project, along with Patrick Hurley from the Memphremagog Watershed Association. First of all, really quickly, I just want to thank the community and the town and all of the people that helped us do this LWAP process. I really want to thank the Westmore Association, in particular Bruce Tanner and all the other hardworking Westmore Association people for supporting us and getting us in touch with people. We're also thankful to the town of Westmore and the select board for, and in particular Elaine, for the hard work of getting us what we need and getting us in contact with people. And just to thank the residents of Westmore for coming to the public meetings, for participating, and in particular those property owners that have let us entertain these project ideas on their property and projects that will benefit the entire community and our beloved lake. And finally, I want to thank my partner in this project, the Memphremagog Watershed Association, and its amazing staff, Patrick Hurley and Gabby Giannoni. A couple quick housekeeping things. We talked a little bit about navigating teams. You could raise your hand. I can't see it right now, but Patrick, if you could see if people raise their hand, let me know if you need help with teams. I think we talked about where the chat bubble is and muting yourselves. The meeting is being recorded. If you are not on our email list, we'd love it if you put your email in the chat so we can be in touch with you. I will also put a link in the chat where you can sign up directly for the district's mailing list, but I don't know. It'd probably be better if you just put your email in there. For questions, we will have some set Q&A times. Feel free to just drop any questions in the chat, or during the Q&A, you can raise your hand and just have the opportunity to speak. I'm also going to be dropping just a really quick survey in the chat that I'm hoping people can fill out. And finally, we will share these slides with you all, or maybe via the Westmore Association and the towns, so you can have access to these slides. If you definitely want the slides, you could also just put that in the chat and put your email and your name. So again, my name is Bevan. I work for the Orleans County Conservation District. We've been helping land stewards with water quality and soil health since 1947. I'm forgetting all of a sudden, in Orleans County. And we've also started doing more water quality projects on the lake shores. My actual position is Lakeshore Coordinator, so I'm engaged with 2 LWAPs right now, one at Echo Seymour and then wrapping up this Willoughby one. We basically got a grant for this project through the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation to do this LWAP, and we'll explain that really quickly again for those of you who haven't been at all the meetings already. So basically our agenda for tonight, we might be able to keep it to an hour. We've sort of allocated an hour and a half, but we're going to start with a quick little water quality report from Bruce Tanner, who's the chair of the Water Quality Committee for the Westmore Association. And then I'll just review what is an LWAP, what's the process and objectives. And then Patrick will dive into how we actually did this LWAP, all these field assessments we did, looking at the watershed, what that looked at, how we prioritized and identified the really important projects that need to happen. And then we'll talk about broader recommendations outside of these big projects, which can feel ominous, the simple and small things we can all do. What are those next steps? And definitely have a couple of Q&A opportunities. So really our objective for tonight is to share the outcomes of the LWAP process and what really are the next steps. How do you turn this into an actionable plan toward implementing these restoration projects that ultimately help the water quality of Lake Willoughby? We just want to encourage everybody's engagement from the community and make sure you get your questions answered. So I'm going to let Bruce take it away and chat about some latest water quality, ongoing water quality stats and the latest. And then Bruce, just tell me when you want me to advance the next slide from this first one.
Thank you, Bevan. And before I get started, I just want to extend on behalf of Westmore Association a big thank you to the LWAP team, particularly Bevan and Patrick and Gabby and Abraham, who's since left. All did amazing work, and the result is this excellent report that will serve as an invaluable roadmap going forward. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So why did we undertake this? Well, we've been monitoring the state of Willoughby Lake since about early 1980, and with that data, we have noticed an upward trend of phosphorus, which is the limiting nutrient for aquatic plant and algae growth. And so we want to turn that trend around if at all possible. And that is the main motivation for doing this. Currently, as most people know, Willoughby Lake is among the top 10% cleanest lakes in the state of Vermont. On some measures, it is the cleanest, but it is definitely right up there, and we want to keep it that way. It's in great shape right now, and we want to keep it that way. So, next slide. For the last 3 years, I've been taking samples from 6 of the more important tributaries to Willoughby Lake to try and see where the phosphorus is coming and what happens during a storm. Here is this last year's data. In general, when there are no storms, the level of input is right around 10 parts per million. The current level of phosphorus, average level of phosphorus in Willoughby is below that somewhat, but it is trending up. But notice what happens if you'll all remember the big flood of early July. Went out and sampled shortly after the storm, not right at the peak. The guidelines are to try and get there at maximum flow. And I think I was just a tad late here. But notice that the concentration of phosphorus in the streams during storms can increase by as much as 10-fold or more. In fact, if we look at the 2022 slide, which I think is the next one,
Right.
You'll see, whoops, too far.
This one.
Whoop.
Yep.
This one. You'll notice that in the Roaring Brook, the concentration of phosphorus almost topped out at 400 parts per million. A huge increase. The differences between the 2 years are probably due to sampling timing and other aspects. But we want to make our watershed more storm resistant. and resilient, and to try and bring these peaks down some. And so that is basically why we ventured onto this project, and we're very happy we're doing it, and we want to continue. This is just basically the beginning. This is going to be a roadmap going forward for many, many years.
Oops,
And
sorry.
hopefully in time, we will turn everything around. So with that, I will turn it over
You bet.
to Pat.
Thank you. Or you can turn it back to me. I'm just going to let some more people in. I guess I have to let people in. I thought I gave access. Huh. Someone's saying they can't get in. I don't know why that is. Okay. Back to slides. So thank you, Bruce. You're amazing. We really appreciate what you do, watching all of that. Just a real quick review of what is an LWAP and what the process has been to date, and I'm going to hand it over to Patrick because he's got the really interesting stuff. Basically, a Lake Watershed Action Plan is a tool, it's a process, and then it's this final report. So it's basically an assessment and planning tool that helps identify the greatest threats to the lake ecosystem. So what are those stressors and conditions? Bruce is talking a lot about the impact of stormwater runoff. We're also, always kind of looking at erosion and the nutrient loading from that, sedimentation. And we also do look at invasive species and habitat loss. So those are kind of more the co-benefits. So we're answering the question, what are the sources of nutrient pollution and what can we do about them? It's been about a 2-year process of field assessments, so basically just on the ground, and also looking at the data that's already out there of the core areas that we say are the shorelines, roadways, and streams. And we also look at working landscapes. And then definitely part of the process was getting community input and help with prioritization. We came up with this list of potential restoration projects that we then kind of prioritized as what were the most, I guess, urgent, or they call them problem areas, but Patrick always likes to say opportunities, which I think is great. And then today's basically meeting is to kind of formally present the final report, which is still in draft form, but it will be finalized and it will be a public document. And we like to point out that it's a guide going forward for years to use as an actionable plan on like, okay, what's the next projects we could work on. There's been some deliverables since, again, we have a grant from the Vermont DEC that we are asked to do as a part of this project. And so, the community engagement meetings, all the collection of the data library, which you can find on both the MWA and the Orleans County Conservation District websites, doing the field assessments, identifying the projects, and then coming up with these preliminary designs for 3 projects. And then, of course, this printable final report. So, and Patrick's going to talk about those projects shortly. So the process basically started in July of 2022, so just under 2 years ago, with a kickoff meeting where we, again, really tried to get community's input on what they thought was important. And then we spent 1.5 years doing all these field assessments. And then we had our prioritization meeting this last July in 2023, where we talked about the projects and got people's input. And then Patrick was working on the 30% designs at the end of last year. And we got landowner commitment to just entertain these 30% designs, which is basically just a concept, a basic design before you put a ton of time into it. And then now, we made our deadline, Patrick, March 2024. We are here to present this plan to you all. So with that, I'm sorry, I never made my screen all the way big. I should have done that. I'm going to hand it over to, I'm going to get out of there and let Patrick share his screen with you, and I will check questions while he's doing that. So take it away, Patrick.
Thanks, Bevan. So yes, I'm Patrick Curley. I work with the Memphremagog Watershed Association. We're based in Newport. I live in Newport. I love working in Westmore. It's been a real treat. I wanted to thank Bruce again for summarizing exactly why we're here. The lake is in good shape, but there are trends that raise eyebrows, and so we want to get ahead of those trends and start making both kind of procedural and kind of physical efforts to move forward to improve protections and protect the best, restore the rest kind of an attitude. And we want to just make this information as publicly available and widely known as possible. And so I appreciate you all for being here to listen to the work that we put together, and to be involved in what's next. You know, both the Conservation District and MWA were local organizations. You know, we don't want this report to be put up on a shelf and kind of forgotten about. We want to continue working on these projects with these landowners, with the town, with the association to see these through, because that's what we do. That's why we're here. So I'm going to turn off my camera and I'm going to share my screen so that you all can follow along as I move through. Again, we want to thank DEC for providing us the opportunity to work with this town and in this watershed. And you can see some of my contact information there. You're welcome to reach out to us if you have specific questions. As Bevan mentioned, the draft report is just that. It will be finalized by the end of the month. So I think 10 days, if you can submit any questions, comments for the report in the next 10 days, we can realistically incorporate them before we kind of put a button on everything and submit the deliverables to the state, close out the grant. So taking like a step back, we really kind of scoured the watershed. We looked primarily on the northern half of the watershed, you know, above the state lands, because this LWAP process is geared towards non-regulatory, voluntary water quality and habitat restoration projects. So we're not focusing on things that are already under regulatory control, such as wastewater, septic systems, the state highway that runs through town, and the state forest lands that also have their own stormwater management and habitat management plans and requirements. So we're looking more at like the private land sector, the town road sector, the waterways. You know, where can we look at those areas on the landscape and identify opportunities to either protect functioning natural resources and aquatic habitat, or restore function to those that may be a bit degraded or a bit out of whack. And when you step back and look at all the projects that we identified, over 75 opportunities were cataloged and will be uploaded to what's called the Watershed Project Database, which is a tracking tool that DEC has. It's publicly accessible. And then we really scoured down on or focused down on 30 of them to evaluate individually. Okay, these are the highest priority projects. What would happen if we were to lead further down this road? How much would it cost? How much phosphorus reduction would we see? What sort of co-benefits like aquatic organism passage or flood resilience, those sorts of things would come alongside those projects? And when you boil those 30 projects down, you know, we're talking about a potential reduction of 173 pounds of phosphorus per year, which if you've ever seen how much phosphorus is 173 pounds, I'll be shocked because I haven't, but it looks like metric tons of sediment, approximately 99 tons of sediment, if you use what's often used as kind of the baseline phosphorus to sediment concentration. We're talking about ideally restoring woody riparian buffers along over 12,000 linear feet of streams and lakeshore. That's an optimistic perspective. We'd like to improve floodplain and wetland functions across 5.8 acres scattered throughout the watershed. There's 6.2 acres of agricultural runoff or agricultural areas that could benefit from having a few best management practices installed. And then there's over 5 miles of roads and driveways and road associations that could be upgraded or enhanced so that runoff is reduced, erosion is under control, and anything that is en route to flowing to the lake can be diverted into, you know, for instance, an established vegetated area. So we're talking about some pretty big numbers, and it's not going to get done overnight. It's one project at a time, but they could have potentially significant cumulative effects when done at scale. So that's kind of what the 10,000 foot view could offer us. So Bevan mentioned we did a lot of field assessments. We really did. We walked over 20 miles of streams in this watershed, And I think we can confidently say we walked more streams in this Lake Watershed Action Plan than any other Lake Watershed Action Plan has done in the state. And that's part of the reason why we, have over 500 observations and have identified 75 potential projects, is because, we didn't just sit behind a screen and look for opportunities from above. We went scouring on the ground for them and talking to landowners and talking to the town and talking to the association and cruising the shore of the lake and looking for signs of erosion or sedimentation, and thinking the whole time, how could we reduce this so that it doesn't actually end up in the lake and result in increased phosphorus concentration. So we did, I think, 9 lake-wise assessments. We covered 3 miles of private roads and driveways and 3 miles of public roads. And also looked at 5 large properties that are several hundred acres, whether they're farms or forest lands, because often you can combine multiple projects on a single property when you're talking about something at that scale, and it really turns into high bang for buck. So this just gives you kind of a layout of where we look. As I mentioned, we really focus on the northern part of the lake, except for that primary drainage coming down Route 5A at the south end. For the most part, the southern half isn't developed, so we're not going to propose going in there and making a mess or doing any elaborate project work. We're looking at developed lands, we're looking at roadways, we're looking at streams that have been encroached upon by development. And so those little cyan squiggly lines, those are all the mapped streams in the watershed. Those red bracketed sections are what we completed in terms of assessments. The yellow lines are what we had proposed for assessments. So we did more than we proposed. And then those little triangles, you see the white triangle, those are all observations. And so we collected over 500 observations just from walking the streams. And the outcome of that is, 13 potential riparian buffer plantings. That ranges from somebody's camp that might have 50 feet of stream frontage to, a farm that has 5 drainages flowing through it, which amounts to 1 mile of stream frontage or close to it. So there's huge variety in the spatial, character of some of these projects. We also observed a lot of culverts that are just old or improperly installed or have been scoured and are compromised or just need to be upgraded. And we think that's one of the bigger takeaways, is just trying to upgrade the infrastructure, the drainage infrastructure around the town. It was settled a long time ago. It's not heavily paved, roadways. And so trying to put properly sized culverts along these streams and drainage networks actually reduces erosion. Imagine you put a reducer on a pipe. What comes out the other end? It's faster. It's got higher PSI, more erosive power. If you put a bigger coupler on that pipe, it's not going to have that erosive power. So we like to think of it that way. Put the proper size pipe in the stream, and you'll have less problems down the line and down gradient. There's a few opportunities for floodplain and stream enhancement. These streams are often very steep and hard to work in. But when you get down to the bottom of the reaches before they hit the lake, there's some areas to improve wetlands, to improve floodplain connectivity. So we really try to highlight some of those. There's one potential wetland restoration project, dam removal project. I don't know if anybody knows that there's a dam hidden up in the hills that we found. And then some invasive species control, which I know is a hot topic in Westmore. We also scoured the lakeshore twice. We did the northern half of the lake once with Bruce in the spring of 22, and then we did the entire lake with Bruce again in the summer of 23. And from that, we identified a handful of lakeshore buffer planting projects, a few stabilization projects, and a full-on kind of restoration project at the North Beach, which we have tabled. But there's always opportunities to remove, armored concrete or stone retaining walls and replace them with natural bioengineered shorelines. So those are some of the sort of small projects that may be a little more complex, but aren't of great scale and magnitude. So we didn't focus too much on the lakeshore projects, but they are an important component just based on how much development is happening and occurring on certain parts of the lakeshore. We also looked at a lot of the roads. The Westmore Roads Department does a great job at keeping up with the municipal road general permit and upgrading segments that are non-compliant. And this data is actually, out of date. There's some of those red and orange segments, which indicate they're non-compliant segments, have been updated in the past years, particularly at the top of Hinton Hill Road. But nonetheless, we drove and walked a lot of miles along these road networks, looking for opportunities to stabilize ditches, to stabilize outfalls where culverts daylight on the other end of the stream or on the other end of the ditch. Recrowning roads, removing greater berms to encourage sheet flow off of the road into the forest rather than this concentrated kind of fire hose that can accumulate and turn into gullies and what everybody thinks about when they think about mud season in Vermont. And there are a lot of opportunities yet to continue with road upgrades. Some of the soils in Westmore are just not easy to work with to turn into a road surface. And so it's going to take a lot of thinking and a lot of, time to address all these segments that cross the numerous waterways. There's a lot of both real perennial streams and just ephemeral drainages that cross these roads. And so they're always going to be one of the most important components for protecting the lake is just making sure that we're not concentrating runoff and sending it straight down the brooks and into the lake. We want to keep it on the hillside and in the ground wherever we can. The pink lines are also private roads. There's quite a few private road networks with associations that manage the roads and share the costs. And we're particularly excited to work with some of those along the periphery of the lake because we now have access to funding to working on private road networks so long as we're doing things according to clean water funding policy. So that's kind of a newly opened door, and we'd love to kind of try out some strategies relating to those kind of smaller road network systems. But we did find over 21 road erosion reduction projects and 3 that kind of fall more into the stormwater management. It's hard to parse those apart in a town like Westmore when you don't have like a big Walmart or housing development complex. But ultimately, all of these projects are really related to roads and stormwater. So as I mentioned, we identified 75 potential projects. These are going to be reviewed with DEC and then uploaded into the database. A summary is, a handful of farm projects. A dam removal is a picture. This is right to the north of Hinton Hill Brook or Hinton Hill Road as you're going up that first climb. It's in the woods. It's a pretty interesting old dam, and it's probably not widely known, and it potentially is a flood hazard. So those are the sorts of things that we look for if this thing were to, breach or blow out. What sort of damage could it do downstream? There's a bunch of forest projects, not all of which we were able to cover just because of the sheer volume of forest land in the Westmore drainage area. But we are working with some large landowners at the top of the headwaters to continue to pursue those opportunities. So that's been a spin-off project from this effort. As I mentioned, 19 stream floodplain projects, invasive species, 10 lakeshore projects. We found 1 trash dump that could get cleaned up, some buffer plantings, wetland restoration, a whole slew of project opportunities. But we had to figure out, how do we rank these? How do we evaluate them against each other? How do we compare them and figure out, okay, what is worth the time and energy? So we came up with this wordy, abstract prioritization criteria, but it is very handy because it puts numbers and values to projects so that you can directly compare them against each other. And so we borrowed some of these methods from other lake watershed action plans in the state. This is also an appendix in the final report, so you can dive into this when you're drinking your morning coffee tomorrow morning. We'll provide a link for you. But ultimately, we really are concerned about water quality. That's about half of the points that any project could score. So if you're a really lucrative phosphorus reduction project, you get a bunch of points. If you're trapping sediment, you get a bunch of points. If it's a larger drainage area, you get a point. If it's an agricultural land use, or if it's got a lot of impervious surfaces like pavement or rooftops, you get another point. If it's directly connected to a stream, you get some points. Is the landowner supportive? If they're like, sign me up, that's a couple points. If you haven't even made contact with them, that's no points. Is it expensive and complex and going to require a lot of engineering and permitting? Well, those are fewer points. If it's cheap and can be done by hand, it's going to get a whole bucket of points. Operation and maintenance, we take that into consideration. And then earlier on in the process, we kind of probed the community and asked them, what sort of co-benefits do you guys really care about? You know, is it invasive species? Is it aquatic organism passage? Is it lakeshore natural communities? Is it these chronic problem areas and flood zones? Is it the visibility? Is it the, you know, agricultural land use compatibility? There's not a lot of farms left in Westmore. And so we love to work on those that are still holding on to make sure that they're viable and to make sure that they're still in compliance and that they're doing what they can to keep, you know, water quality high and aquatic habitat connected. So we ran 30 projects kind of through this gauntlet. And here's kind of more tabular look at it. You know, you've got different possible points over here on the left for different categories that we evaluated them. So some of these are numeric, some of these are qualitative. And again, you can kind of look through our appendices to get a better understanding of this, but all boils down to, is this a realistic project? Does it have meaningful benefits? Is it executable? And is it going to be a nightmare of maintenance for the town or the landowner? And we try to implement this prioritization rubric so that those easy, effective projects float to the top, and those abstract, complex projects maybe need a little bit more thought and discussion before moving forward. And we based a lot of our cost rates on some published values from DEC as well as from VTrans. So whether it's, you know, a floodplain project per acre per linear foot or a stormwater project per acre of drainage area, you know, we tried to use realistic numbers, and then we tried to adjust for inflation too, because everything's expensive now, and we know that Westmore has a limited tax basis. But do remember that a lot of these projects we're trying to fund through grants, and so where we can get match from a landowner or the town, it's going to go a long way. But we really are here to bring funding and technical assistance to the table. So we don't expect to dump all of this on the town or the association. So then we evaluated all those priority ranking metrics, and we come up with this kind of shotgun pattern of projects all throughout the watershed. And we had a prioritization meeting, I believe, in July to kind of select which projects were to move forward. We initially proposed 5. One included North Beach. That one raised a few eyebrows, and so we decided we'll shelve that project and we'll look into other projects. So we focused on a ditch project on the Grandview Farm at the end of La Crosse Lane. We also have a feasibility study for a farm pond and dam removal on the same property. We looked at developing best management practices for road erosion control on Lakeview Road and Big Valley Road on the west side. We developed a concept for stormwater diversion and treatment on Hinton Hill Road. And we also developed a stream floodplain restoration project combined with a culvert replacement underneath Route 5A, right where Wells Brook empties into the lake. So at kind of near where the intersection of Hinton Hill Road and Route 5A merge. And so, okay, so we have this table. We can show that more. This is just kind of reiterating the same prioritization metrics. There's a whole bunch of data behind this, but ultimately they're scattered across the watershed. We selected those 5 and we proposed them to the town. We kind of sat back, reflected, and shifted our priorities to some that were a little bit more ready to be developed. And so as you can see, there's a couple different project types throughout the watershed. And they're often, you know, if you look at this map, you see that they're clustered. There are clusters of opportunities. We see a lot of it at the mouth of the streams where they meet the lake, where it crosses Route 5A, where there's a lot more development. We see them up alongside Lakeview Road, and we see them along the actual shore frontage where we have some residential properties that could benefit from some lakeshore friendly practices. We also tried to evaluate the relative proportion of phosphorus loading to the lake from each one of these kind of sectors. Now we break it out. There's agricultural sector, there's the stream and wetland sector, there's the lakeshore sector, there's the road sector, and there's also the stormwater sector. And so as you see, the roads are an important component. It's 30% of all the projects that we evaluated. 30% of the phosphorus is related to these road projects. A third of the phosphorus is related to agricultural projects. A quarter of it is related to stream projects. Not a lot is related to lakeshore and stormwater. And take this with a grain of salt, because again, these are just looking at the projects that we prioritize, those 30 projects. And I do feel that the lakeshore sector is underrepresented here, only because there's a lot of lakeshore property. There's a lot of lakeshore development. You know, there's no inclusion of like septic system contributions, you know, to this number, you know, and septic systems that are old are not very effective at reducing nutrient inputs or actually, you know, treating wastewater. So, you know, this is a pretty coarse number, but it's helpful for us to understand, okay, what sector should we really be focusing on? The roads, the farms, which are a gray area in terms of voluntary, non-regulatory versus regulatory, but where we have some retiring farms, that's a lot more easy to justify as a non-regulatory project. And then the streams are important. They're adjusting, they're moving, they're eroding, we're getting more rain. So we're really focusing on those waterways as conduits of sediment and phosphorus and how to kind of trap that before it makes its way all the way to the lake. So as I mentioned, we kind of shuffled the ideas from what concepts we were going to design, which we proposed at the public meeting, to which ones that we settled on. As I mentioned, we worked on some ditch improvements on the Grandview farm. We developed concepts for a stream realignment and culvert replacement on Wellsbrook. We designed some kind of low impact green stormwater retrofits for Hinton Hill Road right at the bottom of Hinton Hill, and then 2 road erosion reduction projects over on the west side, where roads are steep and there's a lot of water coming off the mountain. So I'm going to show you a little bit what these designs look like. These are done as kind of, you know, an exercise that you can bring to the table with stakeholders and say, okay, this is what we're talking about. This is the area of the property, or this is the segment of the road. These are the practices that we would like to suggest be installed to reduce sediment and to reduce runoff. So this is the Grandview farm. Liz Tucker's here. She has been working with a lot of local partners and organizations to address some legacy issues on this farm, including manure pits, ditches, silage pits, old farm ponds, stream diversions, gullies. So, you know, this is a big property and we're really excited to work on this because there are so many things going on. So this project right here is a ditch stabilization project. There's a few artificial ditches through this property that act to collect water, collect runoff, and essentially rapidly shunt it off the property down into Ministers and Mill Brook. And what we'd like to do is arrest that process. We want to slow that water down. We want to keep that sediment and that soil in place. We want to recharge the groundwater with the water so that it's not concentrated at the surface and has a lot of erosive power. And we want to revegetate these areas so that they're a little bit less prone to erosion. So you can see we have a couple alternatives, some of which include check dams and turnout swales, some of which include woody structures to slow down erosion in the ditches. These purple areas down here, if you can see my mouse, these are actually really steep forested gullies. We've been talking with the Zimmers and Susan Blackstone about expanding this project onto their properties, which are subject to the runoff from the farm. You know, how can we use the natural materials on the site like logs and wood to slow down this gully erosion to trap some sediment in place? I know that Liz is also working with NRCS to remove some pits and ponds and working with the Conservation District to develop a feasibility study on removing a particularly problematic pond that involves a diverted stream. So there's a couple different concepts, but these designs are all, you know, to scale. There's something that can be used to you know, estimate quantities of work and to come up with really, you know, not precise, but at least realistic budgets. And they're an early stage design to really flesh out the alternatives. You know, when you look at this close-up design here, we're talking about putting in earthen and stone check dams in the steeper sections of the ditch to act as grade controls and to trap sediment. We're talking about putting swales in the shallower sections of ditch to physically get the water out of the ditch and back into the field so that it can percolate into the ground and slow down and drop sediment. We're talking about putting woody structures where we can to just add some, resistance and some roughness so that the flow doesn't continue to scour out the ditches. Where we can improve drainage, we're going to move a culvert like this red area over here, essentially realign a culvert so that it's not charging water into the ditch, but we can spread it out across the field and use something like a stone energy dissipator to slow down that flow so it doesn't cause yet another gully. When you look at the ditch concepts, you really got to consider the shape of the ditch, the slope of the ditch. And when you're putting in check dams, those check dams have to be spaced properly. You essentially want the top of this check dam over here to line up with the toe of the next upstream check dam. So we're employing these practices that are common, they're standardized. We'd really like to do it at a cost-effective scale, also that we can slow the water down. We can keep it on the landscape, make it work a little harder before it gets to the lake, and so that it can drop off some of the sediment, some of the phosphorus, some of the other nutrients that it's carrying with it. So we provided these detailed drawings and concepts so that we can, discuss this with the landowner further, try to get a little bit more firmer numbers, an idea of what permitting requirements we're facing, and then we can use these drawings to apply for grant funding to take it to the next step, final design, and eventually implementation. Here's some more details of some of the woody structures. On the left, this is something that we would use wood sourced on site. And then here's another detailed drawing of the swale so that flow coming down the ditch from the top right. It has a little settling basin. There's an earthen check or an earthen dam, and the water can flow slowly out of the ditch back into the field and dissipate as it goes meandering through the agricultural fields. The next project we focused on was the Hinton Hill Road project. This is a baseline conditions map, existing conditions map. There's a lot going on in this area. There's a lot of property lines. There's a stream. There's some gullies. There's some stormwater infrastructure. There's utilities. So this is a best professional judgment plan of where these utilities are based on existing surveys that we collected from the town, based on information provided from Bruce and folks at the church. And so we really need to understand these existing conditions so that we can propose where to squeeze in some treatment practices amidst all of this infill development. And so what essentially we came up with are ideas that can be taken in whole or in part. So this is a project idea where we would essentially divert water from an existing culvert and catch basin near the parking lot of the town office. And instead of letting that go straight into the brook, where it's actually causing some bank erosion and potentially some unmitigated sediment and phosphorus loading, we would direct that water, in an underground storm drain with a potentially additional catch basins to a vegetated treatment area, something like a biofiltration area or a rain garden, something that's properly sized to deal with that runoff volume, that amount of water. And the most sensible place to put it is the church. And it's next to the church right of way. It's next to the V-Trans right of way. It's between the church and the highway. There's no perfect place for these treatment areas only because there's a lot of development to work with, and we're not going to propose moving the highway. There's also potentially sensitive areas over here. This to me looks like a wetland. We didn't do a formal wetland delineation, but I've done them for 10 years, and I would not propose putting anything over there because you're going to run into hurdles. It's going to cost a lot. The state's not going to be supportive of digging up a wetland to put in a wetland. And so it's not a good idea to go down that road. There are some existing treatment sections like this swale that comes off of Hinton Hill Road and kind of curves out into that meadow. That's a good thing. It can be enhanced, but it's also not a big problem. It's catching water, it's slowing it down in a swale, and it's really kind of infiltrating into the ground. Similar situation, there's a catch basin here that goes over to a little sediment forebay. That's also a good thing. If we wanted to capture water coming from further up Hinton Hill Road, right at the intersection of La Crosse Lane, We could install more catch basins that take the water, and instead of shunting it down this gully, which goes behind a few private properties and a few town properties, we could bring it down the road further and then put it into those treatment areas that we would try to expand or enhance to make sure that they can handle the flow. But what we do see in this intersection, there's an awful lot of water coming down Hinton Hill Road, and it gets dumped into this little gully behind some of these houses, and it's kind of causing a little bit of mayhem in terms of erosion. These houses are these cabins or camps are built right on the edge of the stream, and if we're only projected to get more water every year, then I think we should do our best to try to mitigate any further erosion or just flooding issues that could happen in this area. This is not a hugely lucrative project because there's pavement, because there's storm drain infrastructure involved. This would be expensive, and I don't have a great sense as to what the real or the fully realized cost would be. But based on similar projects in the area that we've done, it's going to be $100,000 plus project, and it's not a major drainage area, but it is a major thoroughfare. So it has public visibility. It has the opportunity to put in educational signage. It has the opportunity to build on existing BMPs. So it's scored relatively high when we evaluated it as a project component. Compare that with Liz's projects, where we're estimating at the upper end of $100,000, but over 3 times as much phosphorus reduction. That's a much greater project cost efficiency. We're talking $10,000 per kilogram of phosphorus compared to $35,000. So that's what we're trying to keep in mind this whole time. Some of these projects are not as water quality lucrative as the next project, but they might bring along these co-benefits, like it being in these public areas where awareness can be raised and the purpose and intent of the project can be promoted. Here's another cross section for this Hinton Hill Road. Essentially, this cross section essentially captures what the installation would look like from this catch basin right by the post office box, or the drop box at the town parking lot. It would go under the road, it would cross the road, there'd be another catch basin, and then would daylight into this vegetated treatment area on the church property. So that's kind of the longitudinal perspective. So we're trying to provide this data and this information so that people can actually take a hard look and say, is this feasible? Can this be designed? Is it going to be obtrusive or expensive? Are we going to hit things like bedrock or utilities? That's where we're trying to take into consideration, like, where could we physically fit this project? And so I was happy to take on this idea because it is kind of challenging. It is a head scratcher. And if it doesn't go anywhere, at least we evaluate it. We didn't just talk about it and then never follow up. So it's an important idea. It's one of the few paved roads with stormwater drainage infrastructure, and I think a retrofit project would be valuable here. We also, as I mentioned, did some BMP designs for sections of Lakeview Road and Big Valley Road. These are just 2, I think 6 different maps and concept plans that we developed for the town road commissioner and the road foreman. These are based on what it would take to get the roads up to the municipal road general permit standards. So installing stone in the ditches along the roads, grading the crown of the road so that water sheds off and doesn't concentrate into a single flow path, removing greater berms at the edge of the road so that you can promote that sheet flow into the woods rather than down the ditch where it just washes out. Installing turnouts, which essentially are just a swale that you dig almost perpendicular to the road to get the water out of the ditch and put it back into the woods. Things like stabilized culvert outfalls, where you have a cross culvert and you need to ensure that it doesn't just scour out a giant hole and wash out and fall and just wash away into the brook below it. So there's a handful of segments of road up here that it's not a super expensive job, and while we can't necessarily get clean water funding to do road work, there are programs like Better Roads and the Municipal Roads General Permit and town budgets that can address this. So we just tried to put this together to give the road foreman and the commissioner a real roadmap of where we think these BMPs should be installed, and we give some cost estimates. This is one of the more effective projects, $8,000 a kilogram. That's one of the cheaper projects that we can muster, only because roads are a major contributor. And being able to kind of prioritize these segments of roads over others, I think is part of the reason why we're here to share this information. There was one other project on Wellsbrook. We don't have the designs to share tonight, but they are in the appendix F of the final report, and it includes a stream realignment and a culvert replacement. The culvert is right near Hinton Hill Road on Wellsbrook. It's undersized, it's poorly aligned, and then the stream actually goes through this kind of wicked granite block stone. I almost refer to it as a flume. It's quite dramatic, and it's just old. It's probably 100 years old, and it's starting to fail. And we think realigning the stream back towards a more natural alignment and creating some floodplain would do wonders. So that's a project that we're still exploring. It's a big lift. It would involve V-Trans. It would involve a major road crossing construction project on Route 5, which I bet nobody's super thrilled about. But it might also prevent a kind of not a disaster, but a major damage to infrastructure if that retaining wall and that stream were to collapse. So to give you a sense, these are some pictures. They're pretty simple road BMPs that we would recommend on Lakeview Road and on Big Valley. And this could be, and this is already happening. Like the town and the roads department have done great work at the top of Hinton Hill Road as you're approaching the state park, and just really prioritizing segments of road in Westmore that can get these sorts of approved and kind of tried and true practices. It would really help to keep the sediment on the mountain, essentially. Keep it out of the lake and on the mountain. So all of these priority projects, we evaluated them. We tried to do some design work for them, and we really wanted to see them moving forward. We don't just want to see these things shelved. So we're underway with the, Liz is underway with the NRCS to get some of those ponds and farm manure pits addressed on her property. We're looking to seek 100% final design funding for those ditch stabilization efforts this spring in conjunction with the Conservation District. The Conservation District is already in the process of hiring a consultant to do a feasibility study for a farm pond and dam removal. We're still working with V-Trans and DEC to evaluate that Wellsbrook stream realignment and culvert restoration, and hopefully we could apply for funding as soon as the spring or the summer to get a little bit more of well thought out designs put together for that. With the new change in select board, we'd love to get to know the new members more and discuss some of the work that we'd like to see prioritized on Lakeview Road and Big Valley Road and Long Pond Road and some of those bigger networks that cross a lot of stream drainages, and have further discussion about Hinton Hill Road and kind of the comfort level between the church and the town in terms of pursuing that concept further. But that said, these are just 4 to 5 projects. There are a lot in that batch import file that will be providing the state, 70 additional ideas here. And so there's opportunities for private landowners to really take their own initiative, for the Westmore Association to take some initiative to see some more, comprehensive strategies and practices adopted across the watershed. And we tried to put this into perspective, and I think this is where I hand it over to Bevan to walk us through this perspective.
Oh, yeah. Actually, go backwards. I think before we do broader recommendations, let's just stay here for a sec and do some questions. I think it's time for some input.
Yes.
So go ahead and click on the little raise hand if you guys want to do that. I'm going to ask first. There's some questions in here that are waiting, so I'm going to get those to you, Patrick. And they're both about the Hinton Hill Stormwater Project on the church property. So I'm going to ask them both to you. So one says, you are proposing a wetland area on the front lawn of the church next to Route 5A. Can this be moved further away from Hinton Hill Road? And then the second one's related. can you consider the area north of the upper parking area on the church property? So it sounds like a couple questions about the church property.
So these are pretty good design specific questions, and I could go into great lengths, but I'll try to be brief. I do believe you could probably go a little bit further, I guess towards the northwest, with the wetland area. If you're talking about between the church and the intersection, you could progress a little further. But I do want to warn you that little dashed green line you see here, that's at minimum the 50-foot buffer from that discernible waterway. And if a delineation determined that wetland or a potential wetland extended beyond that stream, that little trickle, then you're adding another 50 feet to that. So the reason it's there is because we want to stay away from those regulatorily sensitive areas. So that addresses that first question. The next question, someone mentioned about north of the parking area. This is already kind of an existing drainage treatment area of sorts. You know, it's got this nice vegetated swale. And we could certainly, you know, design or engineer or practice that would complement this area and perhaps bring down more of the runoff from towards La Crosse Lane for treatment. But at the moment, one of our biggest concerns is actually this lower culvert right by the town office parking area. And there's no way to bring that water from this, culvert, but also catch basin. There's no way to bring that water back up the hill. So everything's got to be gravity feed. So the storm drain would have to go down the hill, and there's just no other room on the town office property to treat that water. You know, I suppose it could go directly across the street under the parking lot between the church and the hall, but you've got a septic system there. I think you've got like a stone Zen garden or whatnot. And so, you'd be giving up something to get something. So this one was really a head scratcher, and it's not a perfect solution, and it will need further evaluation. And it could just not go anywhere. It's really one of those projects that, I think it needed to be fleshed out a little bit further, but is not by any means clear cut.
Thank you. And I don't know if you, quick summary on the status of the Hinton Hill project. You're still in conversation with the church, and it's a big project, and it's going to take a lot more thinking. And right, Patrick, how would you summarize status of moving forward on that one?
I think a meeting between the church and our team and the town would be helpful. And also at some point looping in DEC and asking them, do you see this being a viable project in terms of funding? I think it could be permitted, but in terms of funding, it might not be the most attractive project, in the basin or in the watershed. So definitely need some more, exploration. And if there's interest from the town and the church, we're happy to act as that kind of project developer. But if it's too much too soon, we also understand.
I'm not seeing any hands up unless I'm missing it. So speak up if you are. I have a question I'll ask, because I feel like it's a silly question, but to become one of the 70 projects, there just has to be some type of erosion going on. Patrick, what qualifies something initially to be a project?
So that's a good question. The 70, no, I would say no, that erosion is not a requirement. It could be a stream that doesn't have any woody vegetation. It might not be eroding or eroding yet, but it's receiving runoff. It doesn't have, woody roots, woody vegetation to hold the bank together in the event of a flood or event of a scour event. So it could be something like that. It could be a forest trail where people use to skid logs, where the ruts from the tires of the skidder or tractor are just hijacking a stream and taking that water and scouring out, forest, just scouring the forest and landing in a brook. So that could be a project type. Invasive weeds control is a project type. A pile of garbage dumped on the edge of a brook is a project type.
Anything that
removing.
could be a project. It's
Yes,
not quite
and
right.
and that list needs to be reviewed, and then, it could be uploaded to the project database.
Okay. There was one more question about the church. How about taking Hinton Hill water southwest straight toward the lake? Costs more, but not church issue. Great display site.
That was an idea, Randy, and I got the impression that Memorial Park was a bit too sensitive of a location to implant any treatment areas. So tried to avoid that, but also a completely reasonable option, if that is a, surmountable challenge.
Okay.
It
Um,
appears like the soils would be more favorable and the wetland risks would be less so.
And real quick before I do see some hands up. I was just going to tell you guys, I put in the chat the survey. It's just 3 quick questions about the LWAP for this process so we can learn. So if you find it in there, it says, here's the link to the quick 3-question survey. If you could click on that, you could even just leave it as a tab in your browser until after the meeting, or you could fill it out now. We'd appreciate it. And then I have Liz Tucker, would you like to unmute yourself and ask a question or a comment?
May I? Yes, yes. I have a question about the very sharp curve. Actually, it's where I live, right on Long Pond Road. A bunch of riprap was put in on this area, which may or may not be eroding significantly, but there seems to be a huge loss of woody material because of the constant work on the road and the extensive logging that has gone on north of or uphill from this area where there's been extensive usage of this road over the past 20 years. So I'm just curious, is there anything that can be done where you have, the Millbrook, you've got this curve, you've got this constant area of potential erosion, but loss of woody material because of the road crew by necessity needing to basically bury those trees and which kills the tree. Is there any way to plant cedars or something within that riprap? Is there any way to add any organic material to the riprap so that you can plant cedars? Because obviously they'll grow at a 90-degree angle to the ground.
Yeah. Liz, that's a great question. Long Pond Road is very challenging. It is old, it is steep, it is right on top of that brook. It's narrow. There's nowhere to look, there's nowhere to put water. It's incredibly difficult.
Right.
And I think the riprap is a necessary thing, if I'm picturing this location correctly, because there's probably a cross culvert that comes under the road and drains the ditch
Right.
from the cut slope. And if you didn't have the riprap, it would just cause a landslide, essentially. It would just wash away that hill
Exactly.
slope right below the road. So it
Exactly.
is really troublesome. And we wanted to choose that road as one of our concept designs. But it's so prolific across the entire length of it. It would have consumed every ounce of design concept budget that we had. And I think
Okay.
the roads crew is trying to address those hot spots, and there has been upgrades for the MRGP permit done on that road. And I think it's going to be a perpetual project. It's hard to
Right.
say. Like the
Because
best
I
thing
own
possible
it.
would be to move that road, but that's not going to happen.
Right.
So
So
we just have to
because I own
manage
it,
it.
is there anything that me as a personal landowner, is there anything that I can do myself, to mitigate that?
You could, if there's like really significant areas of like bank failure or the road prism is like washing away, you could definitely let us know, let the town roads department know, because oftentimes, we're driving around or they're driving around looking from the seat of a car and we can't see all the way over the bank.
Right.
And so it's
Right.
important to
Yeah,
be
I
given
talked
that
to them
information.
yeah. I talked to them a couple years ago and I said, is there any way, I understand that, that you don't want anything, any material going into the brook, but is there any way that we can add some organic material so that we can get some cedars to take root there and maintain that slope? And they said no, but I was just curious if
Yeah,
I could
it
do
is
something
tough.
there.
There are ways to plant, like willow cuttings through riprap embankments, but it's a specialized piece of equipment. I don't know of anybody around here that
Okay.
has that. And there's no guarantee that it's going to work. So it's tough.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yep, no problem. Good question.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, John Z, did you want to ask a question to the group?
hi,
Or a
guys.
comment?
Jonathan.
Comments are welcome.
Yep. How are you guys? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask is I caught our road foreman going out on 3 weeks vacation, and he had started to look at some of this stuff. And the discussion we had was from a cost perspective, was it feasible? And some of it he thought, I think the Big Valley and Lakeview specifically, it probably would cost more than that. So we know what we know about where we go today to get funding for road projects. And I wanted to just find out, when you guys say you're going to help with grants, talk about that more. Because we know, better back roads and V-Trans, we know about that, but is there other stuff we should be looking at? And who do we talk to, and what's your role in that?
Sure. Should we jump to that slide, Patrick, or should we make them wait? We do
I
have a
think we might
slide
have to
on
wait,
funding.
make you wait, John, just a minute. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Okay,
and also,
no-
yeah, we have a
I'm
slide on
willing to wait.
funding. I also have an idea for that. I think we need to do like a separate webinar where we really explain to all these communities with LWAPs about like what that is really means to go out and try to find funding and how we
Yeah.
can help. So,
Okay, so I'll news takes time. I'll wait.
and maybe we can keep going and we can do another Q&A at the end, or people can stay on to chat if there's like more pressing conversations. Let me check the chat again, but yeah, Patrick, I guess we could just keep going here.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
go ahead,
John, we'll
Patrick.
definitely come back to that, and the roads are a tricky one, so I do want to address that question.
Yeah. So broader recommendations. Was I going to do this one, Patrick?
Sure.
Explain your pyramid.
So yeah, the pyramid was kind of this is my creative abilities here. The pyramid is really just to show that this is like a cumulative effect. We can start small with individual projects on parcels on the shore of the lake or along a stream or on a farm. But we really want to start building this as like a community-driven effort where people start buying in and building interest in adopting practices that they see their neighbors employ, and really spreading it, kind of like wildfire across the watershed. So you can see it build from the landowner scale to a whole network of a road association neighborhood, to the Westmore Association promoting this across the whole community, the town of Westmore adopting practices or, continuing to work on the municipal roads, general permit projects. And then ultimately, in the larger scale, like you're all positioned within the Menfor-Magog watershed and Orleans County, both of which, we are missioned to work in, to facilitate project development, to collaborate with community members. And so it is this kind of tiered, dynamic where all these cumulative projects will add up, but any one project standing alone, doesn't hold much mustard, so
Nice.
it really is something that we're trying to emphasize as this, it's got to be adopted at great scale, and it's got to be adopted at many tiers. And so that's what that means. And then there's a few items on the right that show you exactly what specifically people or the association or the town can do with, actionable items.
Yeah, and I can go. Did you want me to go through those really quick, Patrick?
Yeah, I think it would help.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is basically, and this is included in the plan. Again, these actionable items. So the broader recommendations, and there's real nice specifics in the end of the final report. So they're in there. Real quick, and we'll just go over this, and I have a slide which contains some of this as well, but really to start a Lakewise campaign on Willoughby. I know Bruce is motivated. If you guys get a certain percent of Lakewise awards, then you can become awarded, the actual lake gets the award, which I think should definitely happen on Willoughby. And we're here to really support the promotion of Lakewise. And I'll talk about that a little more later. And under that, you don't have to necessarily go for the Lakewise Award, but anything people can do to remove impervious surfaces on their lakeshore properties, expanding no zone or low mow zones where, we just trying to encourage people to avoid the lawn to lake as much as possible and still have a beautiful property. And that goes with managing runoff. There's great resources out there, which we will follow up with at in a follow-up email, like the Vermont Guide to Stormwater for Homeowners. Retrofitting retaining walls. I don't know if there's a ton of retaining walls on Willoughby, but we looked at Elaine's. I don't think she would mind me talking about it. And she was very game to hear about how we could remove that retaining wall and replace it with a naturalized shoreline. So that could be a really fun demo project. And that's something I think we could get grant funding for. Maintaining and upgrading septic systems is key. It's a tough one because it's expensive. But the more we can do to encourage people to understand what the options are, and some other lake associations have hosted these septic socials where they have like an informative social gathering where people learn about septic systems and the new options. Always with our working landscapes, and that's one of the things we do here at the Conservation District is working with farms and other working landscapes to reduce and manage and treat. And Liz Tucker has been such a great example of someone who's just really been eager to do whatever she can to help deal with some of these legacy ditches and things that are causing runoff. And adopting the river corridor, I think Patrick knows more about that than me, and stormwater management bylaws. And then we've talked a lot about upgrading the roads, which I think Westmore is really doing a great job with. Patrick, did you want to say anything about the river corridor and bylaws
Sure.
that the town?
Yeah. So there are kind of standard bylaws that the state has drafted for towns to consider adopting. Two of which I know of most is the river corridor bylaws and the stormwater management bylaws. So the river corridor bylaws essentially add additional protections to mapped river corridors and essentially work to prevent development, encroachment on within the river corridor so that there's not an increased flood elevation, there's not increased flood risk, hazards, that structures are built appropriately, that crossings are built appropriately. And it's something that the town can do to really set firmer protections along the waterways, that drain to the lake. And the stormwater management bylaws, I'm not as familiar with this. I feel like it's a newer offering from the state, but it essentially adds additional protections to development, to new development or redevelopment where there are limitations and requirements that must be met for certain square footage and essentially where the water drains to. So these are issues that are pervasive in every community, and it helps to have some kind of boilerplate language that a town can take and sift through and evaluate and then vote on whether they will adopt it or not.
Nice.
Obviously, it comes with a lot of nuance, so it would be a process that the select board would want to bring in some DEC experts and potentially talk to other communities that have done such things and adopted these bylaws.
Yes. And then you want to go to the next? We have another slide with even more specific.
Yeah, so this is a lot of text. I don't expect everybody to read this. I'm not going to read through it myself, but think about that pyramid. Where do you fall? Are you just a landowner, or do you work for the town, or are you with the association? Are you a watershed partner? These are specific activities that you can do, that you can promote, that you can grab onto and run with, and you can spearhead. If you work for the association, we really do need to recruit Lakewise people, Lakewise properties. It was not easy to get Lakewise assessments done in this watershed,
No,
which
it
is
wasn't,
at
yeah.
stark contrast to folks in Shadow and in Seymour and Echo. You know, there was a lot of apprehension or just not much interest in the Lakewise program, which we would really like to see change. Only because it's really low commitment. You know, a lot of folks can sign up and get an award that day and not really have to do anything. And if you don't get an award and you get a recognition certificate, it clearly outlines that there are small changes that can be made on this property to become more lake friendly. It's non-regulatory, you know, it's really not, no strings attached as far as you take it as far as you want to take it. So Bev and I are really keen on promoting like an outreach campaign, a social media campaign or marketing campaign to like really dial this in and promote this program.
Yeah.
Alongside the Lakewise program, driveways. So many camp driveways just go straight to the lake and don't have any sort of interception of the runoff and the practices that can mitigate it. You know, a lot of we're just engineered to want to take water and get it off of our property as fast as possible, but that is not good for the lake. And we really need to oftentimes sacrifice a piece of our property to be that sponge where we won't mow it, we won't try to park a car on it. We just need to let it be wet because it has to be wet. Otherwise, the lake will suffer. And so just being able to identify those areas and just accepting like this is never going to be a beautiful fire pit spot. You know, it's going to be wet and it must remain wet. And then, you know, if you work for the town, like consider, you know, the vegetative buffer disturbance permit. This is great. This is a great tool. I don't know if most residents in Westmore know about this vegetative buffer disturbance permit. It's quite a mouthful, but there are rules now. There is the Shoreland Protection Act, and I don't see anywhere on the buffer disturbance permit reference to that. And the Shoreland Protection Act actually is pretty strict. It regulates all clearing and development within 250 feet of the lake shore. And I think that permit needs to say at the top, this is in addition to requirements set by the Shoreland Protection Act. So anybody who's cutting trees and building a camp or redeveloping a camp or expanding a camp, they are subject to those rules. And I think that the town needs to, you know, make that abundantly clear because, you know, it's not every day that landowners get informed of a new environmental protection statute. So it does fall on us, the town, the association, to just bring awareness to that. And then there's this really super broad one at the bottom, these partners. You know, we are here, as we mentioned, to assist. We don't expect to dump this on the town or the association, but we know that you know everybody in the town. We don't have those phone numbers. We don't have those emails, but we can provide that content. We can provide the technical assistance. We can apply for grants. We can manage grants. We can implement projects. We can have designs compiled, or we can subcontract engineers to do them for us. So we are here to facilitate projects, but we are not going to push anything that people don't want to do. We are not going to push projects through. It's not our business. It's not our game. It's not our angle. So we need buy-in. So like every step of the way, we want a letter of support. We're going to ask you over and over again, letter of support, because we want to make sure that you fully understand what you're buying into, because there are commitments to grants and there is a lot of money that can change hands. And so we want to be serious about this, and we don't just want to walk away, slap our hands and say it's done, because there are requirements in the long term and we want to make sure that everybody knows them and buys in, because there's nothing worse than a project that fails, and we don't want to do projects that will fail.
All right,
And
funding.
now, John, funding.
Yep.
So, this whole package was funded by a DEC contract, and Bevan and I's contract is up at the end of this month, once we submit this report and these deliverables. But that does not mean that we're going away. We've already submitted a grant for that farm pond decommissioning project. You know, Ted Siddell from the Conservation District is working on that project. We'd like to submit design grants for that ditch stabilization and that Wells Brook realignment and culvert replacement project this spring. There's a whole slew of options. Many of these projects will require multiple grant sources. So there's the Clean Water Service Provider grant that's specific to the Memphremagog Basin, and that is really focused on phosphorus. There's woody buffer grants for tree plantings. There's enhancement grants for lakeshore plantings. There's a bunch of different grants for tree plantings, to be honest. There's a whole slew of them. There are better road grants. And now, John, you know more about the better roads than I do, probably. And I haven't actually worked with a better road grant. But if there are road projects that we can combine with just outside of the road right-of-way projects, if there's a road project across the stream and we can get that landowner who's next to the road to be like, hey, you know, this road project would also benefit by addressing some floodplain issues right next to the road, or replacing this culvert that goes under the road, or planting the stream that goes alongside the road. That's how we leverage funds and make them go further. We bring in more phosphorus reduction, we can bring in more money, we can pay the full suite of a project a little bit easier if we can leverage those matched funds. So that said, there's not a lot of other options for road projects in this non-regulatory funding world, because they are regulatory projects by nature. If it's a town road, they're subject to a regulatory permit. We can help with that. We cannot really lead that effort. But the private roads, the driveways, that's where we can really lead. The road associations, we can actually do some work with road associations to address Old Cottage Lane or address Old Route 5 if there's a collective of people who are actually going to commit to doing something. But we can't do one landowner's frontage realistically without getting buy-in from the whole collective, or at least the majority of the collective. So those are some things that we can do specifically for roads. Devin, you look like you want to say something.
No, I don't. I
Okay.
think we're doing good.
John, did you have any specific questions about the road grants, you know, for the town?
Well, I think, so Dan's out for the next 3 weeks, but just let me run a thought by you. I mean, I think the first thing would be to start with what, you know, based on his experience, he'd think we would need for the pure road part. But then I'd like to have someone to run it by to, you know, as you say, well, have you thought about this? Or this might be something we can combine it with. That culvert, that one culvert we did up on Hinton Hill, I think was 50 something $1,000.
Yeah.
And that was V-Trans that did that. So there's funds available from V-Trans, but they tend to fund the smaller things. And a lot of that money has gotten diverted with the, you know, eco tragedies we had last year with the water.
Yeah.
So that
V-Trans does have a pretty well-established kind of like priority list of what structures or what segments of road they're going to work on for the next year and the year after that. So oftentimes we're coming in with a little bit of a lower priority project. Only in their eyes, it's high priority because we see all these co-benefits, but they're focused on the roadway. Whereas we're looking just off the road, like, oh, what about this neighbor's floodplain? Or what about that person's ag field? You know, so we try to approach it from a different angle. But yeah, we are often at, you know, competing against different project priorities. But I think, you know, we still have the capacity to like meet with Dan, and if there's a new, you know, select board member who's fulfilling the road commissioner role, you know, we'd happily meet with them and discuss, you know, where do we see these areas? Is there opportunity for us to help, or do you guys do you have this because you do it all the time? You know, if there's opportunities for us to combine different project types into a single effort, that's kind of where we would really like to become into.
No, and I think that'd be beneficial, because like I said, we know what we know. We don't know what we don't know. So if there's ideas on if we tweak this or tweak that it opens up a new path to take, that's where it'd be helpful.
Yeah.
All right. Well, like I said, I was thinking it would be great for all these communities that are wrapping up their LWAPs to maybe just have a webinar just on funding, where we really can walk people through what this really looks like step by step. So I'm going to work on planning that. It looks like I can't see the chat right now, but I just have one more slide, and then I'll just make sure there's no more questions in the chat. But there are a lot of resources out there. And again, we'll share these slides with you so you don't have to capture all of this now. But the Willoughby LWAP is on both of the MWA website and the Orleans County Conservation District websites. So you can find all the resources and the data libraries in there. If you need to follow up with any questions about the Willoughby LWAP, you can contact me. If you're interested in Lakewise and learning more, you can reach out to Allison Marchione at the Vermont DEC. We hope that you all are members of the Westmore Association and help volunteer. We could do a lot with volunteer help for outreach and education and promoting Lakewise and hosting workshops. There's lots of information about shoreline best management practices, like how to do a lakeshore buffer or how to do a no-mow zone. And that's all on if you just Google Vermont DEC Lakewise, you can download all their great handouts on best management practices. The Federation of Vermont Lakes and Ponds has a really good guide that I like. It's a guide to healthy lakes using lakeshore landscaping. You can download that on their website.
Right here, right here.
And then, sorry. There is information to help you begin understanding how do water quality grants get funded. If you go to the Vermont DEC website, funding opportunities, you can kind of get the beginning of understanding how all this water quality funding, grant funding works. So that's all I have for slides. I just want to thank you all again, because I know it has been an hour and a half. Thank you all again for coming.
Evan?
Yeah.
This is Bruce.
Hi, Bruce.
Hi. First
Hi.
of all, I'd like to say that LWAP has produced a booklet. I have it here in my.
Yeah, I love that
hand.
one.
I have many copies that happy to share, titled Landscape Design for Healthy New England Lakes. It has all kinds of wonderful suggestions on rain gardens, what you can do along the shoreline. And I'm happy to share them with anybody. Speaking for the Westmore Association, we will be definitely promoting Lakewise further and spreading that booklet. And speaking for the church, I'm also a church member. It might be helpful if you and Patrick could meet with us. Our annual meeting is coming up next month, and this will probably be a topic of discussion that might be helpful if we could meet before then.
Yeah, good idea. Great. Well, yeah, I was hoping you put in your final pitch for the Westmore Association. I'm glad that we're going to work on a Lakewise campaign.
We've also talked about a septic social. We'll probably be following up on that. And what was the other thing? Well, escapes my mind right now.
Well, you should invite people to your property, Bruce, because it is an exemplary example of Lakewise best management practices.
I'd be happy to host a septic social if we had more parking.
Oh, right. That's the problem. We have to ride our bikes.
Yep.
All right. Well,
and door knocking,
go ahead, Bruce.
Too.
What's that?
I think the folks along the shoreline should expect the Westmore Association folks to be knocking on their door and talking up Lakewise and septic social, et cetera, et cetera.
Awesome. Yeah, I know Echo and Seymour are doing a joint. They're doing 2 garden tours, so to kind of show people what rain gardens look like. And then they're doing like a day where they talk about all the different best management practices. So there's good examples out there of things we could just reproduce for Westmore Association. Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks. Any final comments, anyone? Feel free to Patrick.
If people want to see the final report or appendix, do they have a link available?
I put it in the chat. I can do it again.
Okay.
Yeah. Here it is. Here's the link to the public folder. Let me see if I can copy that again. I'll put that down there again. Yeah, we'll definitely do a follow-up email. I'll grab all the emails out of here and have Bruce pass it along. So, all right. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good evening. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for your time, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you. staying on? Patrick, you gonna go?
I'll stay on for a minute with you.
Okay. Night, everybody. They have to all sign themselves out. There's Meg. Hi, Meg. Did we forget anything? I always feel like I forget something, Patrick.
I just wanted to wrap up with you. I am removing everybody from the meeting.
Oh, yeah. How do you do that? So you can just bump them out and not end the meeting? Where'd you do that?
If you go to participants, next to their name, there's 3 dots. You can say remove. For me and you, it's probably not gonna work,
Ah.
but.
Oh, duh. Okay. I can just do each person. Okay.
What
Oh,
did
I
you
should end
think?
let me end the recording. La 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 la. Where do I do that? Stop recording. Stop recording.